Areas of the flywheel universe shown in Figure 2, Chapter 2, could readily be drawn to the cylindrical. Then every connected land area of the celestial and the terrestrial could be undulating through the power of every area's magnetic energy. The undulating would be toward and away from the sun, and the sun would be moving in its unchanging course along the entire universe structure. The sun's perpetual journey along the universe course would be that of paternal supervision for the universe whole. Hence the Earth's daily movement, in conjunction with similar movement of all celestial areas, would be toward and away from the sun's path. Such movement would account for day and night. The sun's continuous movement along the universe course would at one season of our terrestrial year be toward the terrestrial area. At another period of the year it would be moving away from terrestrial areas. Moving toward and away from the terrestrial would be equivalent to the sun moving in the same course, but moving slower in the summer months than in the winter months. And both conditions would be equal to the sun's remaining always on the same course, but dispensing greater solar energy at one season of the year. Either of the three conditions will adequately explain the experienced seasons and the longer and shorter days of our terrestrial year. The same conditions could produce the same results for other areas of the universe whole. They, too, experience long days and short days, and seasons, and their periods of night and day vary. This undulating movement of the terrestrial area and all other inseparable areas of the universe whole may be likened to the individual's breathing, or expansion and contraction of the lungs. There are known variations in the speed, or intensity, of individual breathing under normal conditions. And there is at other times an abnormal breathing, which may be drastically slower or faster, depending upon individual condition. Accordingly, there develops constantly varying speeds of breathing among all the Earth's individuals at all times. Areas of the universe would also express multiple variations in the speed of their daily undulating movement toward and away from the sun's course in space, and the variations in movement of areas of the whole would be consistent with continuous unity of the universe whole. Normal breathing of individuals has a range of from 14 to 24 cycles each minute, whereas under extraordinary conditions, particularly in cardiac and respiratory diseases, the number of breaths, or respirations, may be increased to 50 or decreased to 8. Therefore, it may be discerned that there exists constant variation of the speed among all terrestrial individual moving toward the same place, continued living. Each individual of the terrestrial may be considered a distinct area of humanity, and each individual attains the daily and yearly goal with varying speed of movement. All land areas of the universe whole may move with different speeds at different times, and each remain an inseparable part of the connected universe. The terrestrial area's daily long expansion, or a partial undulating movement toward the sun's course, could be of approximately 12 hours duration. The terrestrial daily long expansion could begin at about 12 o'clock midnight and attain maximum daily expansion at about 12 o'clock noon. That maximum expansion would bring the terrestrial to a space location where the sun would apparently be directly overhead. Then for the next 12 hours there would be Earth breath contraction. It would complete the daily undulation, and it would return the Earth to its lowest point in space and most remote from the sun's course. That would be the point at approximately 12 o'clock midnight. About the middle of the terrestrial daily long contraction, or movement from the highest 12 o'clock noon point in space, darkness would begin to envelop terrestrial areas. The approach of darkness would be experienced at some terrestrial points as early as 4 p.m. and at other points as late as 8 p.m., and it would result from the increased distance of such terrestrial points from the sun's course in space. Then the next day's terrestrial breath expansion would bring to some terrestrial points at 6 a.m. the so-called dawn. The light of dawn would increase until the breath expansion reached its peak at about 12 o'clock noon. The peak of expansion would bring the terrestrial to its highest point in space, where it would receive most of solar energy. Daylight would prevail for part of the period of terrestrial lung contraction as the terrestrial moved away from the highest sun point. It may be seen that as each area of the terrestrial reached its high point in space, it would recede with the daily contraction. But another point of the terrestrial whole would take the high point position vacated. Hence, when the Boston, Massachusetts, point of the terrestrial was far removed from the high point of its area's daily breath expansion, Hong Kong, China, and other terrestrial areas would be approaching the high point. Some areas of the terrestrial would experience noon while others were experiencing total darkness. The same condition would apply for all celestial areas of the universe whole. They, too, would be expanding and contracting in common with all terrestrial areas. So, as it is with the individual human body's respiratory variations, the daily expansion and contraction of all areas of the terrestrial and the celestial would correspond. Naturally, the daily respiration of universe areas would be much longer than the human body's respiration. Though ever bearing the same relation as inseparable parts of the universal daily undulation in space, some terrestrial and celestial areas would move toward the sun's course in space at greater speeds than others. That condition would develop variations in time of arrival at the high and low space points representing complete expansion and complete contraction. The difference in speed of movement would in turn develop different hours and minutes for the various terrestrial and celestial areas to experience the sun as being apparently directly overhead. It would likewise develop for terrestrial and celestial areas of the universe whole variations in midnight. The arrival of terrestrial areas at the lowest space point most remote from the sun's course would not occur at the same time. Hence it can be understood that 12 o'clock noon would not apply to all terrestrial areas. And that would hold regardless of what movement the Earth and the Sun prescribed. Many terrestrial and celestial areas would factually experience noon at different hours and different minutes of the hours. The theory of globular isolation makes allowance for such difference in time, but 12 o'clock noon is accepted throughout the terrestrial as a matter of convenience. The following word illustration of a comparative movement to be observed at terrestrial level seems pertinent and may assist visualization of the daily universal undulation. One can readily visualize a frail craft as it participates in the rolling water motion of a calm lake or river. Visualization of the same craft obliged to participate in the violent wave and upheaving motion of a turbulent body of water will materially assist mental comparison of values. It can be discerned that in the case of turbulent water, the bow of the frail craft may be almost upright in space while the stern could be on the surface of the water. Thus the craft would be seemingly standing on end. And every other area of the craft whole, from bow to stern, would occupy a different position in space while retaining unity with the craft. The mental portrait of terrestrial and celestial land areas making a unified daily undulation on the broader ocean of infinite space may be enlarged as follows. Add to that single craft 100 or 1,000 similar craft. Have the bow of one scraping the stern of a connected craft along the entire length of undulating craft comprising the whole. Each craft, and every part of each craft, would reach its necessary high point, or position, in the relative space where the undulation prescribed. The highest point to be attained in space away from the water's surface would not and need not be the same for all parts of all craft comprising the undulating hull. Each craft and its various parts would in time return to a momentary position of even keel, or near even keel, on the surface of the water. And any change of speed for the undulation would affect the time spent by various parts of the undulation at the low water surface point and the high space point. The highest point to be attained in space away from the water's surface would correspond to the highest point to be attained by certain terrestrial and celestial areas in their daily undulation toward and away from the infinite space path representing the sun's course. And the lowest even keel or near even keel position to be attained by all boat parts would be symbolic of the terrestrial and celestial landeries' lowest point of daily undulation toward and away from the sun's course. Some parts of the combined terrestrial and celestial, or areas of the universe whole, would, like the undulating boats, reach the high space point simultaneously. But never could all parts of the unified terrestrial and celestial daily undulation attain the high point at the same time. The same holds true for the completion of the daily undulation, which brings every area of the universe whole to the lowest point in space away from the sun's course. That point would be midnight, but under no circumstances could it be 12 o'clock midnight for all areas of the combined terrestrial and celestial at the same time. Accordingly, all up movement to the highest, or sun's course, point in space infinite would represent the daily course from midnight to noon for terrestrial and celestial land areas. The second phase of the daily undulation would be away from the high sun's course point in space toward the lowest point in space. That would be movement from the high noon point to the low midnight point. Time would have no bearing on the situation. Though the time of arrival at high point and low point would vary for areas of the undulation, the arrival at high point would be noon for each area, and arrival at low space point would be midnight for that area. The foregoing demonstrates how day and night could be experienced without any necessity for isolating the Earth and other realistic land areas of the universe. The universe can survive as a unit, and every land and sky area of the universe can continue to be connected. Yet every area of the universe whole can prescribe daily movement toward and away from the sun. In the consideration of the seasons, it is shown that the sun in its yearly course would be directly over some terrestrial and celestial areas at certain periods when the universe whole was prescribing its undulation toward the sun's course in space. The undulating approach of various universe areas to the sun's course would not imply that the sun was in fact overhead. For the majority of universe areas, the sun would be anywhere but overhead for the greater part of the year, regardless of the sun's apparent overhead position. Direct relation to the sun and direct relation to the sun's course are quite different conditions. The former provides direct perpendicular benefits from the sun when it is the least distance away from a particular universe area, whereas the latter condition would permit only of the sun's benefits at any angle. And the increase of angle would increase the sun's distance from a particular area. Therefore, the day's length and the seasonal change of areas would be influenced not only during the brief yearly weeks when an area had direct perpendicular relation to the sun in its course. The change would also be felt for a period while the sun in its course was approaching direct perpendicular relation to any area, as well as when the sun was moving on its course away from a particular area. As the sun moved in its course, there would develop for other terrestrial and celestial areas the same seasonal change. It would be experienced as the sun approached a perpendicular relation with such an area, and the change would be most marked when the sun had reached direct perpendicular relation. Then, as the sun continued on its course away from perpendicular relation with a particular area, there would develop another seasonal change for the particular area. Thus some terrestrial and celestial areas would be entering their summer season while numerous other terrestrial and celestial areas would be entering their winter season. Some areas could be simultaneously experiencing the longest day of summer while other areas, receiving sun benefits at the angle when the sun was most remote from such areas, would be experiencing the shortest day of winter. There would thereby result variations in the exact time of direct sun for the different universe areas along the sun's course of inconceivable extent. Such could be the development between the sun and all areas of the universe whole, even while every area of the whole could be seemingly bearing the same daily relation to the sun. However, that seeming condition would develop from each universe area's daily movement toward and away from the sun's course. Though a particular area might seem to be approaching the sun could be at its most remote sun course point from the area. The appearance of direct sun could prevail at such a time and place, but the benefits of direct sun relation would be absent. The terrestrial equatorial area and the corresponding celestial equatorial area, or torrid zones, would result from the fact that such areas would reach the highest point in space on the universal undulation making for the day and night of all areas. But the torrid zone areas would never reach the lowest point in space, most remote from the sun's course, to which temperate zone areas would be obliged to move. Like the undulating boats of the illustration, the torrid zones of the universe would reach only the point of obliged through the function of the universal undulation to reach absolute even keel. Even keel for areas of the boat the water's surface. Even keel for land areas of the universe making daily undulation would mean the lowest point of the undulating in space. The daily participation by torrid zone areas in the universal undulation toward and away from the sun's course would be sufficient to ensure day and night change for such areas. But because of the added advantage of their location on the universal undulation, their daily movement, or dip, away from the sun course and toward the lowest midnight point in space need not be as sharp as that of other areas. And their speed at such time and place could be increased so that they would get away from the low space faster than temperate zone areas of the terrestrial and the celestial do. That feature would provide a time advantage in approaching their daily high point toward the sun's course. Hence, for all torrid zones throughout the universe there would be shorter nights and greater warmth. And there would not be the marked seasonal changes of temperate zone areas. On the other hand, the frigid zones, or polar areas, of the universe would hold such placement on the universal undulation that they would have to reach the lowest possible space point. And the undulating movement of their particular part of the universal undulation would be barely perceptible when compared with the movement of other areas. Hence, for half of the year their movement of ascent in space to the highest point approaching the sun's course would be negligible. And it would result in the 6 months of darkness, and near darkness, characteristic of frigid zones. During the other 6 months of daylight, or approximation thereto, the same frigid areas, terrestrial and celestial, would hold a relatively stable position toward the highest universal undulation point in space. The position of frigid areas during that period of universal undulation would provide proximity to the sun's course, permitting sunlight to prevail. However, during the period of high space point occupancy, the frigid areas having 6 months daylight would not experience a direct perpendicular relation to the sun in its yearly course. No area of the universe can experience the period of direct sun relation. But the continued 6 months propinquity to the sun's course would be sufficient to provide the condition of enduring daylight. Therefore, though the frigid areas of the universe would have sufficient summer angle relation to the sun for a measure of daylight beyond that of other areas, they would be deprived of direct overhead relation to the sun during that period. Hence they would not be provided the measure of heat lavished upon tropical and temperate areas during a part of that same period. In other words, as the frigid areas held their highest undulation point, or proximity to the sun's course, it would not represent the high space point of temperate or torrid zone areas. It would permit reception of sufficient sun force to ensure continuing light, but the angle of that reception would prohibit the intensity of heat received by temperate and tropical areas during part of the same period when they were at their highest point of the undulation. There would be other conditions influencing seasonal changes of the year for terrestrial and celestial areas participating in the perpetual universal undulation toward and away from the sun's course in space infinite. There may well exist a very definite influence that would result from lack of consistency in the sun's dispensation of energy, which produces light and heat, or at least substantially contributes thereto, over terrestrial and celestial land areas. It could be that the sun's dispensation of energy varies from time to time. At times, some areas of the undulating universe whole would be receiving less of solar energy than at other times. Such a condition could develop from the fact that, as certain areas reach their sun's course point of summer, the sun would be emitting less energy than it did when other areas arrived at a corresponding position in space. That factor would offset the benefits such areas would normally receive as a result of their direct relation to the sun and its course. A comparable condition could influence the winter period of various terrestrial and celestial areas. They could be benefited by the sun's increase of energy dispensation, and there would be modification of the winter cold of such areas. There is no criterion that dispensation of solar energy does not vary in quantity and/or quality. But there is every indication to sustain the premise of periodic change in the sun's dispensing of energy. Hence the location of connected universe areas on the universal undulation, and the angle of relation to the sun, would influence climatic conditions, seasonal change, and the length of days. The speed of movement in attaining and holding high and low space points, nearest to and most remote from the sun, would likewise contribute to seasonal change and the length of terrestrial and celestial days. And the periodic difference in the measure of dispensed solar energy would also merit consideration as an influencing agent. Another complicating possibility is that the sun, while making its yearly rounds of the universe along its course, performs a secondary movement away from and return toward the constructed universe whole. That would make for periodic increase of distance from terrestrial and celestial areas to the sun's course. Hence some universe areas could be expected to benefit and others to lose benefits by the secondary sun movement changing the sun's course. It would depend on their location in the universe whole. Accordingly, to consider a secondary movement by the sun, the conditions to develop from a difference in the sun's dispensation of energy could be expected to develop even though the energy remained constant at all times and for all areas of the universe whole. That secondary movement would be the equivalent of periodic modification and intensification of energy dispensation. Further, the sun may veer from its course in conjunction with periodic modification or intensification of the solar energy dispensed. There is no criterion within the extensive domain of astrophysics and its assumptive mathematical values to deny such possibility. Infinite mathematics may reign supreme in the universe of the mathematician, and they may dictate the functions of such universe. But the universe of their application has been proved alien to reality by realistic modern performance. Astrophysics has no formula for the directional activity of cosmic rays within our immediate stratosphere area of infinite space. And since that stratosphere area is only t distance of a few minutes' journey over the Earth's surface, there certainly cannot be real determination of energy dispensed by the sun at its assumed distance. And if a gauge of the solar energy dispensed was to be had, it could have application only to the time of measuring the energy dispensed. It could not gauge the energy dispensed ever over a 12-month period. and the gauge could apply only to the immediate area where measurement was made. By no stretch of the imagination could it be considered to apply to all the areas of the universal whole. In view of archaic theories' assumed movements of an illusory globe Earth, there is nothing sensational and the possibility here projected that the Sun may perform a secondary movement. To sustain a postulate which isolates the Earth and disrupts the realistic universe, the Earth is considered to make a primary daily movement on its imaginary axis at the rate of 1,000 miles an hour. And it is assumed to make a secondary movement in its yearly course toward the Sun at the rate of 6,000 miles an hour. Observe the flywheel universe in Figure 2, Chapter 2. It is stripped of the illusory lens-produced curves shown for the inner and outer sky areas of its companion Figure 1. It conveys how the free Sun could veer from a direct space path during its yearly course over the constructed universe whole, and that periodic departure from course could take it any number of miles away from the created universe. There is no way of illustrating where the temporary Sun path would be, but the secondary movement away from the universe would be in a way realized by drawing a line from the illustration's stratosphere center toward one looking at the illustration. There would be no purpose in drawing the line from the stratosphere center toward either side of the universe illustration. Therefore, with proper application to the physically connected and continuous universe of Figure 2, in which the globular deceptions of Figure 1 have been eliminated, one will be able to visualize every land surface area of the universe undulating toward and away from the Sun's course in space. That Sun course may be considered to extend through the center of the illustration. From the point where the Sun is shown at the top of the flywheel, it would move through the dark stratosphere area of the illustration. It would travel the entire length, and it would then return along that length. Regardless of what the Sun's precise position may be, every undulating area of the universe whole would retain its relation to and physical continuity with the universe whole and to the universal undulation toward and away from the Sun's course. The results would be the same if the Sun's placement were in the center of the dark stratosphere area of the illustration, from which point it would complete a yearly circling of the illustrated universe circumference. Regardless of precise Sun course, the daily undulation of all universe areas would cause it deceptively to appear that every area was circling around the Sun as an isolated unit of the universe whole. The undulation movement of universe areas would cause the illusion of circling around the Sun to persist regardless of what the Sun's location in space might be. A parallel to that experience illusion of circling around the Sun is found in a local condition. One can ride a roller coaster moving with great speed up and down, or toward and away from, a huge arc light in proximity to the undulations of the coaster. Each speedy approach toward the light, and departure from the light, must create the illusion of movement around the light. Such example is elementary, but a staggers concept to grasp the greater speed of the universal undulation toward and away from the Sun arc light with a magnitude beyond concept. In terminating this word portrait of the connected and continuous universe in its motion, it seems fitting to relate that the Sun shown in the illustration will be red when observed against the perpetually dark background of the space existing beyond sky areas of the universe. When one observes the Sun from within stratosphere darkness, it has none of the luminous sunlight quality to be observed from land areas. The Sun is just a red disk when viewed from beyond the blue sky. The illumination develops from mixture of cosmic rays with chemical elements of the sky enveloping land areas throughout the constructed universe whole. The result of such mixture produces sunlight and heat on all land under the universal sky. And it is that cosmic ray contact with gaseous sky elements that results in the luminosity of every outer sky surface area to be observed against the dark stratosphere. The same stratosphere darkness prevails over celestial sky areas as is known to prevail over terrestrial sky areas. and unless that darkness did prevail over sky areas everywhere, there would be no art of astronomy. Only the darkness permits detection of the skylight. We now proceed from the flywheel illustration of the universe and its motion to the original illustration of 1928. Though the first is last in descriptive analysis, there is nevertheless a logical pattern. Presentation of the original illustration permits observation of only a segment of the entire universe embraced by the flywheel illustration. However, it may serve to demonstrate the transcendent values in land areas discovered, in opposition to centuries of scientific deduction denying the land's existence, beyond the North Pole and the South Pole points of our Earth. To accomplish the illustration, we must first drop back into space both upper angles of the flywheel at the sun position in Figure 2. Both angles will remain attached to the unbroken area of the flywheel circumference, but they will drop back into space enough to permit both to project out of sight beyond the sun's location. The remainder of the flywheel circumference area will then extend in space a streaming banner universe on the horizontal. The sun will then be situated over the horizontal universe, and the sun's course in space will be over the universe. Now the horizontal two-sided banner, or plane, universe will begin a series of arching at the sun point, and the arching will continue along the entire length of the illustrated universe area that can be held on the page. More of the universe beyond both edges of the page will do the same, but that area cannot be seen. The series of arching up and down, toward and away from the sun's course above the universe, will prescribe an undulation of the universe areas. Every area of the banner universe presented could readily be cylindrical. That contour would in no way interfere with physical continuity of the whole. Moreover, the developments in a world of reality will be the same if the illustrated universe extends beyond the sun, and the sun's course is above the undulating universe whole, or if the sun is moved with the unseen area of the universe which comprised the upper right angle of the flywheel. The sun would then be at the head of the universe undulation. It would act as leader or guide for the entire universe structure. Then the sun would not prescribe its yearly course along the universe structure as described in the flywheel illustration. Its course would become the course of the force it dispense, and that magnetic force would be transmitted along the entire universe structure. Then every sky area of the universe would absorb whatever portion of that perpetually dispensed magnetic force it required. As previously explained, some areas would take less because their condition required less. Other areas would absorb more because their condition demanded more. Hence the inconceivable length of the universe whole is enveloped in perpetual darkness over, or above, the continuous luminous outer sky which extends with the universe land structure. And along the infinite course of the universe, a magnetic force inherent in the structure serves to maintain it on the original construction plane, or level, in space infinite. That realistic magnetic force, engendered within the land structure, may be likened in its eternal function to the human body's actuating spirit. It receives constant replenishment from the sun's dispensation of energy, which is first received in the sky over all land areas of the universe. That magnetic force dispensed by the sun serves a very definite purpose in the outer sky areas where it is received. From the sky it penetrates into the depths of the land, terrestrial and celestial. But, again like the human spirit, its function is never completed. If the universe makes any movement whatever, it is that inherent magnetic force which actuates the motion. And if the motion is that of undulation, it is the magnetic spirit of all land areas of the universe which actuates the undulation. That magnetic force of the universe is beyond the bounds of theory and abstruse mathematics. Its most formidable application serves to keep alive in all realistic matter the natural creative endowment or, if one prefers, the spark of divinity. So the shaping of a pebble on the shore, a pearl in the oyster shell, and the perfecting of a diamond, a ruby, and an emerald, or the development of a single drop of oil in the bowels of the land are no less expressions of creative ingenuity's magnetic force than the inner blue and outer luminosity of the sky, which depends on that force. The uprearing of a mountain at one time and place, or the obliteration of an island at another time and place, attest to the universal magnetic influence from the crater of the sun. If all known philosophy had been rendered eternally mute at its inception, the magnificent truths of creative reality would have been self-evident as a result of the ceaseless function of magnetic force throughout the universe. All that was described of the magnetic function of the universe depicted by the flywheel illustration has equal application to the presently described universe extending as an endless plane through infinite space. The undulation of flywheel circumference areas toward and away from a central sun would be equivalent to an undulation by areas of the horizontal plane universe toward and away from a sun course above the universe in its movement. The horizontal plane universe is comparable to the insect spanner universe extending on the horizontal and waving, or undulating in space. And the conditions developing from both universe patterns, flywheel and horizontal plane undulating toward a sun center and toward a sun course, would apply to a third universe pattern, where the undulation would only seem to be toward and away from a sun leader on the same level as the universe structure. The horizontal plane universe, like the Earth's realistic plains and deserts, possesses length and width. But as the length is infinite, the ends transcend conceptual capacity. Hence they cannot be subjected to physical view. However, the width of every universe area may be established in the manner that width of this terrestrial area of the universe whole is acquired. But the width cannot be established until after we arrive at the particular universe areas. That consideration would have to apply regardless of the shape of the realistic universe whole. There is more to be said concerning width of unknown universe areas. It will provide the answer to the contour of the universe whole, but it is very doubtful that the answer will be seen. It is absurd to attempt calculation of unknown celestial areas of the universe with application of astronomical gauges. However, and without thanks to astronomy, every unknown area of the celestial universe about us is as accurately charted in width as every area of the known terrestrial. Thus, the answer to the realistic universe contour, previously pointed to by the flywheel illustration, is again pointed to by the foregoing assertion that the celestial width pattern is shown by terrestrial width determinations. As we return to further description of the illustrative universe, it should be borne in mind that nothing has been said about seeing the width of unknown celestial areas of the universe whole. We will never see the width until we arrive at the particular celestial areas. But we may know the width from a pattern to which we have access. In the case of the illustrative flywheel universe, every angle thereof participated in the universal undulation toward and away from the sun's course in space, or toward and away from the center of the dark stratosphere area of the illustration. All corresponding areas of the horizontal plane universe would prescribe the same movement up and down, or toward and away from the sun's course, which would be above the universe structure. It may be observed that in both cases the sun's relation to all areas of the universe would remain the same. The visualization from flywheel to horizontal plane arrangement of the universe whole in space would in no way alter the sun's course in space with relation to the universe it served. Let's check the situation. In the flywheel universe, the sun's course would be from its depicted location through the center of the dark stratosphere area. When the flywheel outline is terminated and the circumference stretched out to a horizontal line, which extends beyond both ends of the page holding the illustration, the sun's course becomes a course above the horizontal plane universe. No matter what words area used to explain the situation, the undeniable fact remains that the Sun's course in space is unchanged. In both cases, the Sun is above the universe structure. We changed the contour of the universe, but we did nothing to the Sun and the Sun's course. Though the universe contour may be known, it must ever remain beyond human sight. The realistic pattern of the created universe could not even be seen by an observer beyond the universe, wherever that may be. We who inhabit the terrestrial area of the universe, and are privileged to theorize and conjecture upon the universe contour in space, are, after all, a part of that universe. The patterns we apply to the universe area but timely stopgaps to explain conditions and events, both factual and seeming. And the patterns imposed by our theorizing and conjecturing must be remote from creative reality. In both illustrations of universe contour and movement, each terrestrial and celestial area undulated out in space from the allotted position in the space where it had been created. In so doing, all were ascending toward the Sun's course then, having reached the peak of each area's daily expansion, they would return through contraction to their original positions in the created universe whole. In such manner they caused to develop the physical conditions experienced, particularly long days, short days, and seasons, as well as the manifest conditions of day and night. And such conditions experienced at terrestrial level have to be experienced at celestial level. However, a reasonable explanation of experienced conditions did not demand severance of one area of the universe from its neighboring area. Nor did the explanation of conditions necessitate acceptance of the illusion that every area of the universe is a globular area. And it did not require that every celestial area and the terrestrial whole be assumed to be isolated in space and hurtling in a mathematical orbit, at various fantastic speeds for the different areas, in a yearly course toward and away from the Sun. In the light of modern discovery, the concept of globular and isolated universe areas is discredited, and the discoveries preclude any possibility that areas of the universe whole area, circling or ellipsing in space. Hence the undulating movement of the universe as a connected whole presents a much more reasonable expression of creative ingenuity, and it fits into the pattern of modern discoveries. If we, as insects of the created realistic universe, demand that it moves, let us assume a reasonable movement which affords opportunity to visit other areas of the universe, after having conjectured how to achieve the visit for centuries beyond estimate. As previously related, there exists not a single created manifestation of energy at work where circling or ellipsing actually takes place. Though there are examples without number where such circling or ellipsing seem to be performed as a result of lens function and the ensuing deceptions. This consideration is not to be confused with the mechanics of men, in which a profusion of wheels and globes perform their definite function of circling or revolving. There is no mistaking their movement. It would not be possible for them to move otherwise. But they are far removed from celestial mechanics. The revolving man-made mechanics, expressive of man's mechanical ability, confirms all that has been related concerning the origin of man's globular illusions of the celestial. For it was the circular structure of the human lens which inspired man's construction of corresponding circular instruments. But the instruments were forged by men to require a circling movement and no other movement. And it was the structural form of the optic lens which demanded that man view every area of the universe as globular and, therefore, isolated. Hence the universe whole had to appear deceptively to be comprised of many millions of isolated areas. A recent discovery confirms that the terrestrial area of the universe whole did not escape the disease of lenses. It, too, appears as many millions of isolated globular bodies adrift in space. God did not fashion it in such manner. man was incompetent to fashion it in any manner. But the lens did fashion it in the image and likeness of the lens. Realistic creative expressions of energy conform to a waving and bending motion, and a series of waves would present an undulation. But unfortunately for human progress, the waving and undulating motion presents the illusion of circling when viewed at sufficient distance under certain conditions. There are light waves, heat waves, sound waves, color waves, heart waves, brain waves, and others. They are, each and every one, realistic manifestations which can be recorded. Some can be seen. Others can only be detected by extremely sensitive instruments. Carried to the ultimate, there are spirit waves which, at least at times, are discernible. They can be weighed and recorded. And they can, under appropriate conditions, be seen in transit. This is to do with pure energy and its factual expressions in a world of reality. And if one might have conjured the rainbow at the mention of color waves, it should at once be eliminated from the category of pure energy. The rainbow formation is created by the lens expressly for the lens that is observing it. The rainbow, or any tangent of a rainbow, has parallel with the so-called curvatures of the Earth. And as this work describes, the Earth's curvature must exist for the lens because the lens created the curvature in its own image and likeness. The inclusion of spirit waves in the reference to energy manifestations seems to require some explanation. There exists an eternity of difference in the meaning of the word seeing as it relates to a form of self-hypnosis and as it relates to visual detection of a spirit in transit as it departs from the human body. Self-hypnosis represents the customary seeing of spirits. It is a mental projection rather than a visual detection. And the word transit should be qualified to have application only to the brief interval when the human spirit departs the body, the time just preceding the cessation of all bodily functions which make life as we know life. In fact, it is that spirit departure from the body which brings about cessation of living functions. There is a facetious saying which aptly describes the development of what we term death. He gave up the ghost. In giving up the ghost, the spirit departed. In this instance, ghost is synonymous with spirit. However, we want to recall the spirit they have seen, here, there, and everywhere and under all manner of conditions. The reasonable conclusion must be that such seeing was a conscious or unconscious projection of the mental image retained of a departed person's mortal body. The imagery would be of the body once living. It would not be of the spirit living in that body before the body died and the spirit departed. And the image could be of mother, father, sister, brother, wife, lover, or anyone who was known before he died. Such so-called spirits are seen somewhat on the order of the astronomers seeing rounded bodies circling or ellipsing in space. Such spirits, with bodies supplied by the living mind, are often seen under condition of emotional strain. Their presence is ordained only by the mind of a living person. It is capable of projecting the body spirit, which is not a spirit, almost anywhere. As it is mortal mind that wills the seeing, that which is seen must be a duplicate of the body image that mind retains of a former living person whose spirit has departed. The spirit of that previously living unknown body is no doubt a resident of the unknown spirit domain. And the spirit, because it is a spirit, is without physical characteristics identifying the body in which it formerly abided. The spirit cannot be a spirit and retain mortal features. Nor can the spirit of mortal mind, which was developed to serve the body's needs. The mind remains with the body. It, with the body, was ordained by the spirit which actuated the cell to build the body. Hence we need not discuss the numerous spirits seen, fully attired in the clothing which covered the body where the departed spirit was contained. This does not deny the evidence of spiritual attunement with a departed spirit. That is a very different matter. Under such a condition, the spirit of a living body does in fact attune to a departed spirit. Then the living body strongly feels the presence of the departed spirit. And as the brain of the living person receives the vibration transmitted by the spirit, the mind is actuated to project the body, features, and attire of that which the departed spirit represented. Then, much faster than the F.B.I. could function, the mind of the living person exhibits everything the living person once knew about the former living person, which the spirit vibration represents. Thus, though the departed spirit is in fact strongly felt through the spirit contained in a living body, it is the living body's mind that automatically revives from mind's storehouse of photographs a portrait of the former body that contained the spirit manifested. That is the only portrait the living mind holds. It cannot contain a picture of anything other than the body it once knew as a body. It is no picture of such body as a spirit. Therefore, the living physical entity, you and I and 100 billion others, may reasonably feel spirit presence without seeing the spirit. But how could one hope to see a spirit in body form, particularly if that body was draped in the clothing of mortal existence and expect that it could be the spirit? That kind of seeing a spirit expresses a form of self-hypnosis, whereas positive seeing of the luminous flash of spirit departing the body, just preceding death of the body, represents a visual function like seeing the sun, the light, the darkness, and 1,000,001 things and conditions in a world of reality. The spirit is as real as the body. Without it there could be no body. It can be seen as spirit in its departure from the body. It has been weighed as it departed the body. But it is never to be seen as a physical body. Nor is the spirit to be seen with features, and certainly not with clothing. Only the body needs features and clothing. To progress to what might be considered a more physical realm of energy, where it is manifested in and by land and water mass, there is experienced the regular waving waves of oceans, rivers, and lakes. And there is also experienced the irregular expressions of tidal wave undulations. The experienced earth tremors are expressions of underground waves of energy. They reach the peak of expression in violent undulating earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. On the Earth's surface it is found that gases and smoke clouds billow and roll. But they do not circle. However, the billowing and rolling can deceptively appear to be a circling motion. Lightning bends, and chains, and zigzags in its course, but it does not circle. And all expressions from man's harnessing and utilizing electricity attest that the motion of electricity is opposed to circling. Where the electric current is seen as light, it vibrates to and from in an undulating manner on the filament which carries it. And the emotion is anything but that of circling, even though the current is captive within a globular area, a light globe. Wherever true circling or ellipsing motion is prescribed, it is due to and is an attribute of man-made mechanics. And where mechanics are not man-made, as in the universe about us, man's concept imposes upon non-globular creative reality a false globular outline. There is no disputing that globes and spheres, and globular and spherical items, exist by the millions. But they exist only on the Earth's surface where man created them. And there are numerous man-made products that do prescribe a circling motion. Likewise, are there many man-made objects which, when properly arranged and provided the proper speed, will deceptively appear to be globular areas as a result of the circling motion they prescribe. Yet, when the motion ceases, it will be found that the areas are anything but circular or globular in outline. There is available extensive knowledge concerning lens capriciousness, and the illusions known to develop from motion directly at hand on the Earth's surface. Hence it is most singular that modern man persists in endowing with reality the unrealistic globular celestial areas. And, in granting that the areas are globular, man must decree that they are isolated. Then, with false globularity and isolation and control of mind, movement detected at celestial level must be circling or ellipsing. It is a most extraordinary development that man, after centuries of conjecture concerning the course to Mars and to all other areas of the universe, fears to pursue the course now so clearly defined. In the initial discovery of a land course into the celestial, the existence of land beyond the South Pole was established on December 12, 1928. But the course was not then penetrated. In February 1947, the northern pathway into the so-called heavens above was discovered beyond the North Pole. And a meager length of its inestimable extent was penetrated by a U.S. Naval Task Force under command of Rear Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd. However, obsolete theory and the misconception it fostered for 28 years restricted depth penetration of the southern course. It was not until January 13, 1956, that any real progress was made, when the U.S. Naval Air Unit accomplished a flight of 2,300 miles beyond the South Pole point of theory. But such extent is meaningless when it is known that journey beyond may be continued for hundreds of thousands of miles. Nearly 10 years have elapsed without notable explorative purpose over the northern course extending beyond the North Pole point. Of course, it is possible that penetration has been made beyond the 1,700-mile point reached in February 1947, but the accomplishment has been kept secret. Could it be that terrestrial man's reticence to continue over northern and southern land areas leading into the celestial is due to the fixation of the overworked shooting up conjecture? In a distant year of 50 years ago, this then little boy seriously asked, "How far is the sky?" Since then there has abided the popular thought and discussion of shooting up in a rocket to reach Mars, and to reach other areas of the universe about us. It would seem that at long last a more reasonable and fruitful manner of procedure might be contemplated, particularly after the modern discovery of direct land routes leading up from beyond the South Pole and the North Pole. Progress straight ahead from beyond the pole points will never require shooting up or out from terrestrial level to reach celestial areas. In view of the current trend toward destruction of terrestrial man and his civilization, there is imposed the unpleasant thought, what a pity it would be if man were to destroy his kingdom on earth before adequate preparation had been made for sanctuary on adjoining celestial territory. In the unwelcome persistence of such a thought, there is revived the name of a famous predecessor who dwelt in France. He was known as Jules Verne, and he predicted that the earth would be destroyed by an implement of war which would burst like a boiler. He also observed that the Americans were good boiler makers. We are good boiler makers. And the instruments of destruction corresponding to a boiler are the fearful atom, hydrogen, and cobalt bombs. Can it be that, as man of this terrestrial civilization stands on the threshold of celestial land areas, and when the century's dream of dreams is about to be realized, wholesale destruction will cancel the dream's fulfillment?